The great man Winston Churchill once said, "Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it." History, they say, is not the past, but a map of a past drawn from a particular point of view to be useful to the modern traveler. We are all travelers and we need the past to put us on the right track so that we, those in the future, don't repeat the mistakes that the people who left, the people who came before us repeated. This is JCL Tutorials. I'm taking you through the 1969 Constitution and the setup of that particular government. Follow me closely. Get your pens and jotters. The last video I did was on the 1960 Constitution. In that video, I talked about Nkrumah's setup in terms of his government and the ministers, the cabinet he formed, and how the entire government was structured. So that was the first Republican Constitution. Now, after 6 years, on the 24th February 1966, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown. That was the first coup d'etat we experienced as a country. I'm sure some of you have watched my video on the military regimes and you now know the leaders of that coup. So we had the NLC, which was the National Liberation Council, under the chairmanship of General Ankara. We had Colonel Kotoka and Efrifa all coming together to stage that coup. After the coup was successful, in fact, they did promise that when they take the seat from Nkrumah, they will hand it over to a civilian. And those civilians or the leaders were the people that formed the Progress Party that came with the 1969 Constitution. So we go into that and see the structure of that particular government and how they went about their affairs. When you look at the features, they are actually not too different. So comparatively, you'll be seeing the differences, the slight differences and the similarities. So the military group, the NLC, was true to their word and power was handed over to the civilian. Before that, Edward Ekufuado was the Chief Justice by then. So all arrangements were made and the civilian government took the power from the military. In that particular government, they had two heads for the executive. So we start with a feature that has to do with the executive. In that executive, it wasn't like the 1961 where we had just one person functioning as head of state and head of government. In this case, there were two people. That was Edward Ekufuado himself as head of state performing ceremonial function, and there was a prime minister performing other functions, and he led the party, the Progress Party. Okay, so those functions where you have to even go to parliament or the legislative assembly to take certain decisions with them. But definitely his boss or the head of state will also be aware of some of these decisions. So it was a collaborative work. But the head had two separate people, and that in government will be called bicephalous executive. So when we all look at the system that United Kingdom operates today, they also have the bicephalous executive where the monarch is, or the king is the head of state and the prime minister is the head of government. So we actually had that system in the Second Republic. But today, the 1992 Constitution is not using that system. We've gone back to the presidential system as we had under the 1960 Constitution, where there's only one head and that person performs their ceremonial functions as head of state, and also the person remains the head of government. So we all know basically or traditionally the functions that the executive performs. So implementation of laws, formulation of policies. So if we talk about the function, the executive functions performed by the prime minister here, that will be the case, or that will be what he was doing by then. So if you have a question, who was the first prime minister in Ghana's republic, you have to choose K.A. Busia. So Busia was a prime minister over there. But if the question is about first prime minister of Ghana, then it means you have to go for Nkrumah. Because remember Nkrumah, when he was the leader of government business from that 1957 to 1960, he was described as a prime minister because the queen was the head of state. So you need to read the question carefully and know the right answer to choose over there. So the constitution made it that the president or the head of state will be the commander-in-chief of the Ghana Armed Forces. So that was the executive. Now let's look at the legislative assembly or the legislature and how this one was also set up. So by then, we had about 140 to 150 seats, which means that the people who occupied or who were in charge of the various constituencies by then were within that range. And we had these seats in the National Assembly or the Legislative Assembly. They were charged basically to make the laws. And here, as we have today, the Speaker of Parliament led that Legislative Assembly, and he presides over the meetings over there or the proceedings in that house. And the house was still unicameral. Unicameral means that it had only one house or one chamber. Unlike the Western system, when you go to the UK, where there is House of Lords, House of Commons, those were operating as two chambers. But here, the 1960 Constitution, there was something like that, unicameral, one house, one chamber. Under the 1969 Constitution, the same thing was repeated, but just that the number of seats increased, because under 1960 we had about 104 seats. Now the speaker who presides over the proceedings or the meetings in that house was elected by the members of parliament, or even that's within or outside parliament. Now let's talk about the judiciary. Judicial powers were also established, and they were vested in the hands of the judiciary. So the judicial arm of government, as we also saw under the 1960 Constitution, we had the same thing under the 1969 Constitution. Here, the courts were established, or the courts were created. In this case, the courts had the higher courts and the lower court. We had the Supreme Court, Appeals Court, and then the High Court itself. Then, when you come to the lower courts, circuit, district, regional tribunals, magistrate courts, juvenile courts, and even family court, then they even added the House of Chiefs, where customary laws could be used by the chiefs to settle minor cases in their various communities. So that was how the judicial system operated, or the court system operated under the 1969 Constitution. And the head there will be the Chief Justice. Now there was one special feature as well, the Council of State. This Council of State, just as you have in the traditional setting or the setup, where there are elders who advise the chief to take certain decisions, in the Council of State were doing the same thing for the Prime Minister. So they are to ensure that they give proper counsel, they advise or assist the Prime Minister in taking certain decisions, which comes with policy making. So don't forget, take note, they are to guide and advise. They are to guide and advise the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister was the head of government. So that was the Council of State. Another special feature was the fundamental human rights. Fundamental human rights were established. They were enshrined in the Constitution, and they were protected. They were made in such a way that they had to entrench them. So they were entrenched in the Constitution. Entrenching the right means that they make them very difficult to be manipulated by people in high offices, because they are things that will make people comfortable in the country, where there wouldn't be any form of abuse cases, or people wouldn't be abused. So you realize that in some of the constitutions, they establish what we call the ombudsman, where this person can take up abuse cases, especially when people in high authorities use their powers to trample on or violate the rights of the ordinary citizens. So this person can take the case on and fight for the ordinary citizens, or fight for people, especially workers or traders, and so on and so forth. So all these things happen under the 1969 Constitution. So our fundamental human rights were entrenched. Unlike what people actually raised as a criticism with regards to the 1960 Constitution, where they felt that all the individuals' rights were vested in the hands of the head of state, the president, where the president can choose to do certain things without prior information. Now let's talk about the amendment procedure. This was also another key feature of the 1969 Constitution. Amendment is just like a process of changing the law, any part of the law. So portions of the Constitution were put before Parliament or the House, and the House had the power to change them. Okay, now follow this one closely. When you look at under the 1969 Constitution, the parliamentarians were given the power to change portions of the law. So that is the amendment. Now the procedure was simple. So they are to vote on such. There will be an open debate, and they will definitely vote. In the voting process, before they will take the decision, they will have the debate, and then the voting will come. So 2/3 majority is needed to actually push the thing to the next level, or the decision to the next level. So when 2/3 majority agrees, it means that it will be passed and the amendment will be carried on. Now, one thing that did not happen here was the Constitution actually clearly did not state the amendment procedure for the entrenched clauses, like the fundamental human rights and all those ones. So those portions that were entrenched, those entrenched clauses in the Constitution, were actually not given any procedure on how to go about their amendment. Okay, so they couldn't amend them at all, so they were just left like that. But I think there have been improvements now under the 1992 constitution that can be done. So we need to third decision from the parliament or vote from the parliament, then there will be a referendum. That is what we have under the 1992, so currently. So that's why I keep telling you that when we know the past and we know the things that did not help us, we can work on such things and improve upon them. So there's been a lot of modification. When you compare the 1960 constitution, 1969 constitution, you can see. I'm sure you made some notes. So what I want you to do is that you go over the notes again, and then you juxtapose or put side by side the 1960 constitution, the features, and the 69, or the breakdown, the features, which ones were here and were not under the 1969, which one also were introduced under the 1969 and were not under the 1960 constitution. So then you compare, you can have a full note in terms of how to differentiate or compare and tell the clear differences or the similarities between the 1960 constitution and the 1969 constitution. So take note, there were differences, there were modifications, there were improvements. So this was the structure or the setup of the second Republican constitution that we had in Ghana's political history. So all these information are needed. You need to look at them and compare. I believe you have made a very good understanding of all the things that I've put across here, and I would like to thank you for watching. Share this video to people out there and let others to know about our history. Thank you for watching JCL Tutorials. I will definitely see you again. Bye for now.